After Donald Trump in the United States, Lula da Silva of Brazil, it is a powerful political comeback for former Ghanaian President John Dramani Mahama after the December 7 polls. It is a new page and a historic moment in Ghana's democratic history. The election generated attention from across the globe, considering the pedigree of the contenders, especially for major front runners. On Monday, the Electoral Commission of the West African country announced Mahama had won the election with 56.5%. The main contender, who is also Ghana's Vice President Mahamudu Bawumia, conceded defeat before the country's Electoral Commission made the official announcement. Mahama had served as Vice President of Ghana from January 2009 to July 2012 and as President of the West African nation from July 24, 2012 and to January 7, 2017. His return to the presidency has stirred conversations about what lies ahead for the nation's progress, especially amidst, of course, the numerous challenges facing the West African country. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall be discussing these in the course of today's edition of Talking Point, just to highlight that, of course, amidst these numerous challenges in the regard, the president-elect has appointed a 10-member transitional team to facilitate the transfer of power from the outgoing government of President Nana Akufo-Addo to the incumbent administration. According to the Africa Development Bank, growth projections ranged around 3.4% in the year 2024 and anticipated 4.3% in 2025. Today we dive into the question, what does Mahama's win mean for Ghana's prosperity? Will his leadership reignite growth, address present national challenges, and shape a future that reflects the aspiration of Ghanaians? Alternatively, will the road ahead present hurdles that call for innovative solutions and a collective effort? Ladies and gentlemen, let's unpack the implications of this milestone election and explore how it could define Ghana's trajectory in the years to come. This is Talking Point. Stay with us. Elections are a litmus paper for democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. On this edition of Talking Point, we focus on Ghana's Decide 2024, where, of course, as announced on Monday by the nation's election commission, the country's former president John Dramani Mahama has won the December 7 presidential election. And of course, this comes in the wake of a leaping, or better still, alien economic crisis plaguing the West African country. And of course, at this particular point in time, the challenges are high, but to face some of these challenges in a bit to address the issue of accountability, the president-elect Dramani Mahama has appointed a 10-member transitional team to work hand in hand with the outgoing government, especially the authorities, to see that there is a smooth transition of power. To evoke this topic of discussion this day, I'm being joined first of all the way from the US by PAN-AFRICANIST, CEO of FINTECH and ECONOMIST. In his capacity as that is the person of Dr. Stanley FONGOD. Thank you immensely, sir, for joining us this day.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for having me, and thank my co-panelists who will be joining as well, and thank those in the streaming platforms and our social media platforms who are tuning in as well.
Thank you immensely for honoring our invitation. Meanwhile, we shall be joined, like you mentioned, by His Royal Highness MUSI in his capacity as a Pan-Africanist. Now, without further ado, we dig deep into today's topic of discussion. Like we mentioned in our preamble, we shall be discussing the West African nation of Ghana. We just got indications that His Royal Highness have joined us this day. Greetings, Your Majesty, for tuning in on Talking Point.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you for always having us on this wonderful show. And thanks to my colleague, Dr. Mengod, for always being there. It's always been a wonderful privilege to be with our viewers out there, and always a privilege to be on the show. Thank you.
You came in just in time. Now, to kickstart, like I was saying, with your co-panelist, Dr. FONGOD. Now, Dr. FONGOD, before assuming office, like I mentioned in our preamble, the former president, Dramani Mahama, who is expected to assume office later, maybe in 2025, who has won the presidential election of Ghana again. Now, his first move is to appoint a transitional team that is going to ensure that there is a smooth transition of power from the outgoing government of the incumbent leader, Danko Akufo-Addo, and his incoming administration. Now, do you see that there would be some sort of difference in his leadership style as opposed to his previous tenure in power from 2012 to 2016?
Absolutely. I think that one of the issues that Ghana is facing, sorry, I'm kind of suffering from liberty of cold this morning. One of the issues that Ghana is suffering actually has nothing to do with the, the issues of leadership style. I think that the outgoing president was quite distant from the ideas of the Ghanaian people. I've spoke to a lot of people in Ghana. I have a lot of friends on the ground who expressed those sentiments to me. And so when you look at somebody like the outgoing president who basically was quite divorced from the sentiments of the people, whether it be on the issues of the economy, it be on the issues of the LGBT community, it be on the issues of Ghana, which is quite Pan-African in nature. I think that one of the most Pan-African nation on the continent of Africa is Ghana. We have more Pan-Africans in Ghana than anywhere else. But Ghanaians, or the Ghanaians, basically, send a referendum to the current administration that this is not what they want. And it was absolutely against the establishment, and the establishment was this unholy alliance with the West. There is nothing wrong with partnership around the world. I think that there is no, I'm not an isolationist. I'm not trying to isolate any nation. I'm not trying to isolate any community. What we are saying is this, that for the protection of our integrity in relationship to our cultures and values, there is absolutely no reason why we should be looking to the West for counsel. We shouldn't be looking to the East for counsel. No country has the moral authority to be able to counsel us on our values and our cultures. So we have to be able to make sure that we protect that. But when you had somebody like the outgoing president who kowtowed to the West in such, a very useless manner, like allowing the vice president of the United States, the failed candidate for the presidency of the United States, show up in Ghana, and her ideas was trying to be able to push an LGBT mindset or, agenda on the people, that in itself was quite excessive. To talk less on the issues of the economy, which really he had no handle on it, and issues of corruption, and people who basically had projects that meant nothing to the people. You can build anything that you want, but as long as the man or the people remains hungry, that's what you're looking after. People were trying to be able to counter to the issues of inflation, which the government had absolutely no solution to. You cannot be talking about projects when those projects will not be able to result to the solutions that you're looking for, especially when it comes to curbing inflation and also bringing about economic empowerment to the people. So that, to me, was exactly how Ghana, the outgoing administration, suffered this defeat. And secondly, the incoming administration with the former president, just like what you're having in the United States, basically is doing all that they can. I'm sure they have seen the mistakes of the previous administration, and now they're trying to be able to correct their wrongs and basically make good on their promises to the people. They have some issues which they raise, especially during their campaign, which to me was more of a bait and switch idea. But I hope that they will be able to correct those ideas going forward, and I'm sure subsequently we will talk about those.
Exactly, and it's all about correcting mistakes for the prosperity of the nation and therefore the continent. Now, Chief MUSI, you listen to your co-panelists. Like it stated, the former president, or now the president-elect, was well known in his previous tenure for the role he played in, in enhancing Ghana's infrastructure, development and all that. But he was criticized for not well helping the country recover from its economic challenges. Now, in this in this upcoming or incoming presidency, which is expected to resume with his new administration, your co-panelist stated that, of course, it will be a new opportunity, like John Mahama had stated during his address on Monday, that it is a second opportunity the Ghanaian people are giving him for him to be able to right his wrongs and do right by Ghanaians. With that said, what specific policies or initiatives will be taken in consideration to ensure that it goes a long way in enhancing or influences Ghana's prosperity? Chief MUSI,
I want to first and foremost thank Dr. Mengod. He mentioned of the most critical points which we need to look at in this new mandate of John Mahama. The issues of economy, the issues of poor standards of living of the people of Ghana, which are some of the most issues that have been raised during the last campaigns and for the last mandate. But looking at policies, I think when we look at John Mahama's new mandate, during his campaign, I followed his campaigns, and one of the key issues was the fact that he was coming back. He was coming back to complete what he had not completed. He quoted a series of biblical chapters saying he wants to pick it up, not for himself, but for the interest of the people of Ghana. And I actually buy with him this policy, and thinking that at this very crucial moment where the Ghanaian economy is dangling, I think this is the right time for him to change policies. But these policies can never work out without him having the right people by him. So his first policy, as he has rightly mentioned, is the putting in place of a new government which would be a government for change. And if he applies this policy and gets the right people on seat, definitely he's going to gain back the trust that he left in the minds of the Ghanaian people when he was in office during his first mandate. I also think that as a policy, if you look at his campaigns, you would realize that John Mahama'S team used the American system to come back into power, where a former president comes back powerfully and looks at taking back projects that he had left and realizing them for the interest of the people, seeing to it that the current government did not meet up with the needs of the people. You would bear with me that the current government failed seriously at the level of their economy, which is the backbone of every country. Once the economy is having issues, there are serious problems within the nation. And for him to have started something and left it halfway, I think he has used the right strategy to come back to power. And for 8 years that he left power, and having been the 8th candidate on the list of the presidential candidates during this last election, he used it as a strategy to gain back trust by referring to the Bible, that being at the 8th position was just the right time for him to pay back for the 8 years that he has not been on the seat. And also he used the American system where Donald Trump used to play back on the issues that he started. And when the former government took over from Donald Trump, they didn't realize it. And he used it to fight back his opponents. And I think John Mahama'S team was very, very conscious of this, and they did just the right thing at the right time. And I think in the course of the program, we will now try to examine some of the issues, some of the strategies, and some of the level ground policies that the government of Ghana also put in place to create a very level ground for politicians to realize their objectives. Because if the Ghanaian system, if the electoral system that they used this year was not quite accommodating, it won't have worked for John Mahama. So the democratic practices in Ghana is something that we also need to appreciate while looking at the policies that John Mahama is to bring on the table for us all to see and bring change to Ghana. And why not keep the trust that his people are counting to get from him in this new mandate?
Exactly, and of course time is going to tell how he intends to maximize this new opportunity that's given to him for the betterment of the Ghanaian population. Like you mentioned, Your Majesty, this is an opportunity for him to tackle key issues like corruption, governance and others, especially the countries are really in economic crisis. Now to you, Dr. FONGOD, you listen to your co-panelist, he mentioned the issue of following up development plans. Now I remember watching an interview that the president-elect had granted some years back around the follow-up, the necessity or the need around, following up developmental projects by the outgoing government or the previous government, by the, from the previous government by the current or incumbent administration. When you look at the African continent, do you believe that we have this follow-up of developmental plans, and how can the different administrations in place go a long way in ensuring that they do follow-ups, pick up from where the previous government had stopped, in order to ensure that there is development, growth and prosperity in the nation?
I think this is the reason why I'm not a big fan of democracy on the African continent in its form. And secondly, I think that the whole concept of democracy or having a democratic society that kowtow or that is much more in service to the different political parties rather than to the interests of the people or the interests of the country is as its at antithesis, to the reason to why we actually have a multi-party system in the first place. My point is this, that we need to be able to find ways in which we can be able to elect people to power. And the idea is, if somebody comes to power with great ideas, a particular political party comes to power and they have great initiatives, they begin great projects, which is for the interest of the people. Once they leave power, there has to be a pathway of continuation for those particular projects. But what we see constantly on the African continent, it's that you'll have people who come into power, and because they're trying their best to hold on to power, they will go as far as destroying all the gains that the previous political party, had made for the country. There is no political party in Africa that is greater than the country. And I think that as long as we continue to play these games, it's not helpful, to us on the continent. It's not helpful to us, as a people. We have to find ways in which we create an environment where if you come to power and if you begin a great idea, a great project, let us actually find ways where we can enshrine those projects somehow, through maybe the Congress, through the Parliament, whatever way we can do that, so that there can be a pathway of continuation. And that will be what helps the people, not who is in power. No political party is supposed to take the place or the purpose of the country. That in itself is wrong. So I think that we have to be able to address that on the African continent and make sure we continually follow up and make sure that whatever gains have been made by one political party, should be continued by another political party. I think a couple of years ago, I was listening to, I've forgotten who it was actually, who basically brought this brilliant idea as to if we really want to be able to achieve something like that, we might be able to think about having terms on the continent of Africa that says, okay, well, if there are two major political parties, and let those two major political parties basically take turns in ruling. The idea becomes, we will see what gains that you have made. Let's say you have a 15-year mandate. Let's see what you're able to achieve for the country within those 15-year mandates, or maybe an 8-year term. Let's see what you're able to do for the country within that period. And then after that, you know, another person comes in and show us exactly what they're able to do. I think that that might be a good way, rather than all these 4-year terms where you're really trying to be able to achieve a project. By the time you get the contracts, by the time you get the loan, by the times, you know, the construction begins, sooner or later, you know, it's election time. And whoever comes into power and whoever got those contracts and whatnot, they just eat the money and they disappear, which is basically the mode of operations for countries like Cameroon, Ghana, Nigeria. You know, the list goes on. We have to be able to make sure that we, you know, we structure this properly. Maybe not Cameroon.
Exactly, and that goes and applies to the rest of the African continent. Chief MUSI, picking up from where your co-panelists stopped, with this year 2024, we've seen a power change hands from the ruling party, you know, to opposition winning across many countries across the African continent. With that said, why do you think we're seeing this wind of change at this particular point in time?
First, I would want to think that like Dr. Mengod said, the issues of a democracy in Africa, it's a call for concern. But we are only learning lessons from what transpired in Ghana. We are learning these lessons and seeing how they can be applied in other African countries, so much so that we should be able to give the will of the people back to them. Because when people go to the ballot box, to the polling stations and cast their votes, their expectations are that their votes are heard. And when once these votes are not considered and elections are rigged, it becomes an issue. So the lessons we are learning from Ghana in its practice during this past election is the fact that there has been a high level of transparency during the election, where if you look at the way the results were compiled, you'll realize that victory, the recounting was done in a very transparent manner, where votes moved from the polling stations. They went straight to the constituent levels of the different political parties, and it went straight to the regional levels, and the results faxed to the national headquarters of the elections observatory structure. And if you look at this shows a certain degree of transparency, because for every political party that was taking part in the elections, they had their own representatives at the different local polling stations who monitored the elections and made sure that the results counted reached the headquarters of the Independent Electoral Commission. And this is something that we need to be able to take across other African countries in subsequent elections. The issues have always been that in Africa, when we are given an opportunity for elections, it takes us almost 2 weeks, 1 week, 2 weeks before elections are ever proclaimed. But if you see what happened in Ghana, you within hours, you could tell that elections were, that votes were counted, and the results followed the rightful channel, though with some little hitches that they encountered. But the voters themselves were at the polling station making sure that every vote counted. One other aspect is the fact that within the past election in Ghana, every political party had to send in locks for the ballot boxes. If you look at the ballot boxes that were used, every ballot box had its own lock, like from every political party, so much so that no one can rig or the boxes cannot be filled until when it was time for the counting to be done. So I think this is some other thing that added value to the democratic practice and to the will of the people who voted. And one last thing that we also need to appreciate is the fact that the Ghanaian government gave a possibility for electoral staff, members taking part in the elections, electoral staff to vote at least 2 days before the voting, for them to be able to cast their vote, early voters, And the military or the security agencies also were given an advantage to also take part in the voting earlier before the real day for the elections. And last but not the least are the media houses. The media houses also were given the possibility for them to vote early before the final day for elections. This cuts down, like in other African countries, you will realize that a greater chunk of people who believe in democratic practices are the people within the electoral staff, who forms a greater section of the non-governmental organizations or the election observatory structures. Some are the media houses and also the security personnel. And if these people are cut off from voting, it usually affects the electoral process in many countries. So in Ghana, they were given time to vote so much so that on the day of elections, they could be at their different stations of work. And I think these aspects are things that we need to also acknowledge that changed the status quo during these last elections that held in Ghana. But we cannot say all of this, Sharon, forgetting that the culture of the people in accepting the fact that they are one is something that we need to also appreciate. For the former president to have conceded the election despite the efforts that he made towards towards becoming victorious. But again, this is something like my co-panelist said, this is something that we need to encourage other African countries to practice. But again, like he said, it is very important, which I want to also emphasize, that when people are in power, they need to give them the opportunity to stay in power, because the practice in Africa is when one government comes in, it goes out, another government comes, it takes new policies, it sacks workers, ministers, and starts the new team. This keeps dragging the development. This keeps pulling us one step or two steps behind when we are trying to move one step ahead.
Indeed, and just aligning with what you said, Chief, I think that is a wake-up call for the African continent to put in place committees that could follow up some of these projects for the betterment of the people. Now, on to you, Dr. FONGOD, you're an economic expert, and I would like to pick up from there. Given the nation's economic development, we see Ghana, which is highly indebted and, of course, is facing an unemployment crisis. Amidst this, John Mahama has an experience, given he has been in power, and he had some lapses which led to him leaving power in 2016. Now he's coming back with full force, having re-evaluated some of the the shortcomings of his previous tenure. Now amending, like he mentioned on Tuesday, he was stating that he was going to mend the nation's economy. Amidst all this, all these changes being put in place, what should Mahama'S, what should be the president-elect's top priority in a bid to stimulate economic growth and reduce unemployment in the West African nation?
One of the craziest thing is that irrespective of how long you've been in power, I think that there are certain parameters within the economy that needs to be met before we start talking about any kind of economic growth. Number one, we have to be able to deal with the issues of inflation. Ghana is suffering from great levels of inflation. And if you know anything about inflation, you have to also look deeply into the economy to start thinking about energy sources. One of the problems that Ghana is having is as a result of our energy. There is this dam in Ghana, which is called the Akosombo Dam. It supplies about 70% of Ghana's energy. The problem is the dam is situated in, I think, the Volta River, which supplies the dam the water it needs to generate electricity. And as a result of, I want to borrow this term, which I will hardly use, which is climate change. We have sporadic. Rainfall is not consistent. It's absolutely, have caused the dam not to be able to produce at its full capacity. Once we have a lack in energy, the consequent results will be that prices will go up as a result of cost, because energy is absolutely needed across the board. So without energy, cost of production absolutely goes up, because we start looking for alternative sources to be able to manufacture. The cost of transportation also goes up as well. We have to find ways in which we can be able to deal with the issues of inflation, and then basically also let Ghana restructure her debt, because without any kind of debt restructuring, it will be impossible for her to pay her debts. Those are the key things that Ghana must do, and those are the key things, that John Mahama has to be able to take care of. Unfortunately, I'm not sure how Ghana will be able to achieve this without basically going through a little bit more stress in terms of our economy. Because once you basically decide that you're going to be able to tackle the economy by bringing down inflation, it's a hard thing to do, because then there's going to be maybe a period of about a year where there's intense hardship before things actually, evens out. But I'm thinking that there are certain things that they can be able to do. For example, if you look at the Akosombo Dam, there has been a lot of flooding reported about with some areas around the dam, and communities have had to move from where they are just so that Ghana can be able to enjoy her electricity. The problem is these people are living in schools, and so if there is a way in which there can be some kind of a resettlement program, then the sentiments of the Ghanaians, and especially those living in those areas, will absolutely be favorable towards the incoming administration. And this will have to be a very big PR move as we try to be able to address the issues of the economy. There has to be a way in which we try to let the people understand and know that the government is interested in working for them and not working against them. That means that the government has to cease from becoming this big gigantic machine, but become somewhat a system that has feelings and emotions, and so they have to start looking at the president for everything that he needs. Secondly, I want to tie in a little bit, especially when it comes to one of the issues that my co-panelist raised. Chief raised something that was brilliant. I think that we have to be able to start looking at the continent not from the construct of religion, not from the construct of ethnicity, but we have to start finding ways in which, or tribalism, or tribes rather, we have to find ways in which we look at the continent based solely on productivity, which means if you're going to bring somebody to power, if you're going to elect somebody to power, it has nothing to do where the person is coming from. It has nothing to do with the person's tribal background. I think that we must be, or religious background for that matter, we have to be able to make sure that we get people who are competent. The current administration, the incoming administration, said something about, they kept having all this. I was following the elections as well. They had this whole entire reference on scriptures, on the Bible, as if to say the Bible had anything to do with success so far as running an administration is concerned. I don't think it has anything to do with that. If that was going to be the case, I think that countries like Nigeria, countries like Ghana and other countries that have had this huge appetite, for religion to be center stage, especially working on the psyche of the people for elections, those countries would have changed. There is something to be said about hope. There is something to be said, especially when we espouse hope and looking onto the biblical text for hope. That's good. I don't have any issues for that. But that does not substitute ideas. It does not substitute hard work. It does not substitute people who know what to do, how to do it, to show up in the marketplace and basically make the market work again. And I think that as long as we keep pushing this whole entire idea on trying to be able to sway whether it be Islam or Christianity, into public discourse, especially when it comes to policy, then we are basically going to have tremendous issues going forward. Okay. We need to be able to start electing people who have the skill set and the abilities to do what they say they're going to do, and then that's how we build an economy. Frankly speaking, the market does not care which religious affiliation you belong to. The market cares about whether you have a product that's viable or not. If I am trying to fly on an airplane, believe it or not, I'm not interested in knowing exactly whether the pilot is a Christian or a Muslim, or whether the pilot believes so much about Jesus or not. I'm interested if the guy has the competence and the skill set to be able to take that machine off from the runway and land it safely on the runway,
okay,
right? So I'm not interested in all of that. I think that those are some of the things we need to be able to fight for.
Yeah, Dr. Stanley, I get you quite well, but then what policies, because we're talking about, you know, him prioritizing the nation's economic growth, trying to see how he can take out the nation out of its indebtedness. So what policies could he put in place to ensure that the country can achieve this economic growth and, of course, reduce unemployment?
I'm thinking that for that to happen, we need to start looking at ways in which we need to work on the agricultural sector and also bringing about a lot of agro-manufacturing in Ghana. If you look at the largest population of the African-American population outside of America, it's actually in Ghana, and it has improved Ghana, especially in the area, in the agricultural sector. A lot of African-Americans are now owning farms in Ghana. There are a lot of Ghanaians that are returning back home to own farms as well, and they're involved in manufacturing. So we have to be able to make sure that the manufacturing sector works, the agricultural sector works, and that's the way we're going to be able to improve and build small to medium-sized enterprises and push them to become successful across the region. Once we start talking about reducing debt, that basically means for us to reduce debt, we must also be able to reduce our borrowing appetite. If we keep borrowing, then reducing debt basically makes no sense. And the only way for us to also reduce our borrowing appetite is to allow the private sector to do what the private sector does best, which will be for the private sector to be involved in creating jobs, allow the private sector to set up businesses, allow the private sector to flourish, rather than trying to be able to get money from foreign governments so that we can be able to build up the economy without even knowing how to build up the economy. Why not allow those who basically create businesses to do what they do best? And I think that that's one of the ways in which we can be able, or Ghana can be able to escape, you know, this vicious cycle of borrowing money and then using part of the money they borrow to pay for the debts that they owe, and this cycle never seems to end. If the small to medium-sized enterprises basically flourishes, the economic outlook in the region will be good, and that also means that the rating or the borrowing rating power, you know, for the particular region or Ghana will also increase. That does not mean that we go and collect money. That just simply means we do what we're supposed to do in relationship to paying back the money that we owe. We can't keep borrowing and borrowing ourselves into prosperity.
Thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD. Now, Chief MUSI, you heard your co-panelist, and of course he suggested that it's imperative for the West African nation to stop borrowing, and that aligns with other countries across the African continent. Now, from your own perspective, as a Pan-Africanist, what do you think the Mahama administration that's coming in could do to address the country's current debt crisis or debt challenges in a bid to ensure sustainable growth? Because though your co-panelist is stating that they should stop borrowing, it's worth noting that there is already a current hole in which the country needs to get out of. So how can this current or incoming administration address these pending problems?
Thank you. I would quickly pick it from the private sector. I'll pick it from agriculture, which Dr. Mengod did mention. Sure. Let me say here that it is very important that for every nation to fight and to have a growth in economy, they must be able to boost their private sector, create more jobs, and of course, limit their borrowing. And in the course of creating more jobs, it automatically limits borrowing, because the private sector will now have the workforce to be able to produce more and support its economy. And in a situation where the government does not create a very flexible tax system for the private sector, it's going to keep on affecting the government and also encouraging them to borrow more from the West. let me look at, he talked of agriculture. That's a very, very a huge industry in Ghana, the agricultural industry. And if they have to invest in agriculture, it means that they are going to create more jobs. They are going to create, give a possibility for more Ghanaians, like they are already coming back home to do agriculture. They would definitely be investing, and people. It's to encourage many more people to come back home and invest in Ghana. One other aspect is health. When the people of a nation are in good health, they definitely add up to the workforce and, of course, put in more of their energy in productivity. So without just looking at agriculture, they need to create the citizens of Ghana. They need to create a good platform for Ghanaians to have low taxes on health facilities, on health amenities, and also encourage Ghanaians to have good living conditions. What am I talking about? Taxes and rents needs to be cut down. Taxes in basic commodities like fuel, transportation, feeding, and all of that, they need to definitely cut down taxes in all those areas to be able to produce more and be able to have the people live in perfect condition. Because one other thing we must understand in Africa is that when once the electors, when they don't feel comfortable within a system of government, they keep on criticizing that system until that government moves out of power. And just coming into power at this moment in time, it is wiser for Mahama and his team to make sure that he has the right people in the right government structures. He shouldn't just go taking people to put in positions of responsibility because they helped him in one way or the other during elections or during campaigns, but he should look for expertise in the different sectors, especially agriculture, the economy, the legislation, finance, and the military. He needs to have the right people put in this specific, and also the justice system. He needs to have the right people put in these sectors who are people who master the game to be able to support him. Because what has happened across Africa and in many other countries is that once someone wins an election, he turns and starts looking at his own close collaborators or friends or people he had promised or borrowers and stuff to put them into power because he just wants to satisfy them. Let me also say here that inflation in most countries in Africa is usually caused by high standards of living by the high-ranking or top-ranking government officials. So he has to be looking at cutting down in infrastructures of high or top-ranking officials, making sure that there is a leverage between the clergy and the bourgeoisie as well as the peasants. He needs to be able to cut down costs and make sure that everyone is having an equitable enjoyment of the national cake. Because when once the top-ranking officials, as the ministers, the directors, the secretaries of state, when once these people start living exorbitant life and lifestyle, it affects the economy. And that is what encourages the government to keep borrowing because they want to remain at a certain standard. So he needs to look at a way to cut down the living condition or the lavish lifestyle of top-ranking government officials. This will definitely cut down on inflation and also reduce their debt, the standards of their debts internationally. Okay, now one other thing which I haven't mentioned is the educational sector. The government coming into power needs to look at education. What are the challenges that the educational sector in Ghana is facing currently? Are there more opportunities for young people going to school? Are there more opportunities for secular education? is which works best, technical education or secular education. So he needs to look at these aspects of governance and promote the sector that blooms better and that works better for the Ghanaian people. And of course, for every nation to develop, they need to look at their technical sector, the technical educational sector, to encourage more of technical technicians to be produced or met in the country so that they can do the work at a lower rate than having expatriates or having foreigners coming in all the time to do the jobs. Take, for example, town planning and development. If you have the right Ghanaians in high offices, the right Ghanaians go to school to have the educational requirements to work in such offices, you will now cut down on having so much expatriates coming in to do the jobs for your country at very high cost. And one other key thing which I need to really emphasize here, which I saw during the acceptance speech of Mr. Mahama, is the fact that I see a lot of excitement on his face. I'm sorry to say this. I see a lot of excitement on his face for having been chosen after 8 years of staying away, after a very wonderful campaign, after the assurance of the people of Ghana giving him the mandate. I think he's excited at that point, thinking that just because he has been voted into power, it means he's the right person. Hey, he has to be extremely careful, because this is an opportunity for him to right his wrongs. This is an opportunity for him to do the things for the Ghanaian people and not for his personal ambitions. I think Dr. Mengod mentioned the fact about Christianity. It's true. I want to raise this. Besides just like the explanation he gave about entering a plane and not knowing whether the pilot is a Christian or not, this is the reality of it. The Ghanaian people, who are made up of Christians, who are made up of Muslims, who are made up of even non-believers, do not want to think what are the Christian ideologies of the president. They just want to see that the rightful things are done for the general interest of the Ghanaian people. I like when he said, which was a biblical quotation, because he's very good at biblical quotations. Yes, we know Ghana is second to Nigeria when it comes to Christianity, but we should not be misled with the fact that Christianity is all we want in leadership. He did say in his acceptance speech that the people of Ghana have set a table before his own enemies. And that should not take him to excitement, because when they set a table for you before your own enemies, it is for you to do those things that your enemies want more than doing the things that please your electorates. So he has to be extremely careful in the way he takes this new mandate in order to right his rights as he leaves office, or as he gets a second term or a second mandate come the next 4 years. Well, the boy it is his court. We can only say it as Pan-Africanists, what we think, what we feel, how it should be done, and our experience toiling across Africa and seeing how things are done around Africa, and help him set up at this beginning. Because it's always said, make hay when the sun shines. Thank you.
Indeed, it's set to take actions when it's the right time. And of course, I'm glad you mentioned key sectors like education, healthcare, infrastructure, and agriculture that would foster the nation's development. Now, before we proceed, ladies and gentlemen, we shall take a quick break this time around to get the reaction of Dr. Nyaka Lagoke in his capacity as a Pan-Africanist, was reacting on this topic all the way from the U.S. Greetings to you, Dr. Nyaka.
The return to power in Ghana of the former Ghanaian president, John Dramani Mahama, is welcome with a sense of hope by the majority of Ghanaians who voted for him. According to the result, more than 56% of Ghanaians voted for him against the flag bearer of the NPP, which is the ruling party in Ghana. The last 8 years, under the leadership of Nana Akufo-Addo, have been hellish and nightmarish for the vulnerables and for the majority of Ghanaians. The president, who claimed that he was going to build A Ghana beyond aid will be recorded as a leader who borrowed massively to the point that the volume of Ghana's debt in 8 years of Nana Akufo-Addo is 6 times what Ghana borrowed since its independence. The Ghanaian businesses and the Ghanaian citizens have been under a string of taxes. For instance, there is a COVID tax, even though COVID is not harming people the way it used to be. And there is also a tax on sanitary pads. And then just to mention those two, the inflation rate is 350%. And just to give you an example, a friend of mine told me that his sister bought a car 2 years ago with at 30,000 CDs. In 2024, 2 years later, the same car cost 150,000 CDs. Now, talking about the fact that the burden is very high on the population, I just want to mention that the regime of Nana Akufo-Addo in 8 years went to the IMF more than 15 times. And now that I want also to put emphasis on the exchange rate. When Mahama'S was there, it was $1 for 4 CDs. Now it is $1 for 16 CDs. I gave this general overview, that brief general overview, in order to highlight what the new president said he will do. He wants to renegotiate the IMF plans, he wants to cut down borrowing, and he wants to scrap senseless taxes such as those on sanitary pads and on COVID. The goals of the economic recovery plan under the leadership of John Mahama'S Dramani is to revitalize the economy, to promote growth, and to reduce the social and economic burden of Ghanaian citizens and businesses. As promised, the new president intends to organize a national economic dialogue in order to assess and examine the state of the economic life of the Ghanaian nations. I welcome that idea because usually when African nations want to organize gatherings, most of the time it is to focus only on politics. Just to give an example of the Convention for a Democratic South Africa, whose objective was to end apartheid. And then when South Africa was transitioning from a regime under the apartheid system to a multiracial and multi-ethnic democracy, they organized CODESA 1 and CODESA 2, the Convention for a Democratic South Africa 1 and Convention for a Democratic South Africa 2, in order to dismantle all the apartheid laws. But there was no serious conversation about the economic life of South Africa. And then, so we saw 20 or 30 years after the end of apartheid that the economic structure is still in the hands of the constituencies and the agencies that sustain apartheid, still in the hands of many multinationals controlled by many whites in South Africa. So the idea of a national economic dialogue in Ghana is something that I appreciate, that I welcome, and I think that that should be done and that should be replicated across the continent of Africa. Thanks.
Thank you to Professor Nyaka for that elaboration. Meanwhile, I was very glad you mentioned the issue of the democratic features in the West African nation of Ghana. Now, moving forward with you, Dr. FONGOD, you listened to Professor Nyaka about what he had to say as far as the development in the West African country is concerned. But looking at the aspect where he mentioned the creation, organization of a national economic dialogue, as as an economist, looking at this, do you think that creating or organizing a national economic dialogue is going to go a long way in addressing some of the key economic challenges the West African countries facing? Dr. FONGOD, please, could you unmute your mic?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay. I was trying to say that addressing the issues of having the national dialogue and having a team to sit down together and talk about issues like infrastructural development is extremely very important. And the reason is because these are quite costly projects, and we need to be able to have those general consensus as to know exactly where we want to go as a nation. The notion that somebody can just sit and decide on what projects that they want to take, to me, I think that is quite ill-informed. If we're able to set up a community that will look across the region and then know precisely, where the economy is going, know precisely what part of the country does need help, know have consultations, have consultants who are on the ground who are looking into agriculture, for example, to have more of a panoramic view as to what part of the country will be good for what particular plant, what cash crops that they need to be involved in, what kind of produce that will be good for export, who they're exporting it to, and why they should be doing these investments in the first place. I think that it will be good to have a community, a community that comes together, a committee that comes together, and be able to have a more deeper analysis as to how these things should be done. The idea that one person can just sit and have a blanketed power to be able to just, wave a pen like a wand, and then things begins to happen. So far as an economy is concerned, I think that that is quite ill-informed. You need to have experts on the ground, people who are versed and quite skilled in these different sectors to be folks that will contribute in bringing about the knowledge that is necessary so that we can be able to make informed decisions as we try to be able, to get the country out of where the country is. And this is across Africa as a whole. And if I was going to add anything else, I will be saying this, that it is also important that when we do so, we are not just looking within the country, we are also looking without. That means, because if you build a business, let's say a small to medium-sized enterprise within a particular country, and if you're not thinking about scaling, then I don't know exactly what you're doing. And for you to scale, you also have to start thinking about scaling outside of the country in which you are in, and at least scaling into the region. So if there are companies in Ghana, they should start thinking about or having the mindset of an ECOWAS, having the mindset of a West African bloc. How can I be able to service the West African market? What is it that I'm producing that will be needed in Nigeria? What is it that I'm producing that I can be able to ship to places like, Ivory Coast? What is it that I'm producing that a country like Cameroon might benefit from? I think that those are the things that will happen once you start having a group of people sit down and have a panoramic view of the entire region, not just of the country, and see how they can be able to build their economy and service the region from Ghana and improve on the quality of of lifestyle for their people, which is basically the Human Development Index, and also be able to see how they can be able to improve their GDP, which is good, but the Human Development Index basically takes precedence because that's exactly how the people feel, and that's what that's why the elections took place in the first place, and the incumbent, basically do not have it that easy. So we have to be able to make sure that we meet up with the desires of the people and make sure that there is some level of joy and happiness as to their livelihood, that they are seeing significant progress, improvements, in their livelihood, not just about talking about, how good the GDP is. The reason is because we can have a good GDP, but the Human Development Index can absolutely be low. So we have to make sure that there's some kind of an equity, there's a balance, in there.
Thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD. Meanwhile, let's reiterate, borrowing from some of the comments of Dr. Nyaka. He stated that the outgoing administration in the West African country had gone to the IMF about 15 times now, and of course he mentioned that the nation's economic impasse is actually not looking so good. But then Chief MUSI Having said all this, we should note that it's imperative to highlight how important it is for governments to, enhance resilience in the face of global challenges. Now, how will the Mahama administration, the Mahama'S presidency come 2025 when they assume office, shape Ghana's role in the face of regional and global affairs?
Well, I would not say anything much than just add emphasis on what Dr. Mengod said, just so I don't have to repeat. But I think he made mention of the fact that he needs to look a little bit out of Ghana, look across Africa, ECOWAS, look towards West African coalition, and also open up trade with other African countries. They need to boost trade with other African countries within the African continent. And of course, they definitely also would want to provide a free trade zone, for. They possibly should be able to provide a free for somebody just joined. Somebody has to leave the meeting. You need to provide a free trade zone for other African countries to be able to get into those countries. So I think this is what we need to emphasize. That we need to get another Africa. Somebody's online, and I think we're getting this noise somewhere, which we will probably want to get something.
Issue, but please proceed, Chief MUSI.
Yeah. So I'm saying that Ghana will need to open up their country, open up free trade within Africa, so that other African countries can do business with Ghana, like was not the case with the former government. And this is something that has already been practiced in many other African countries, and I think we need to give that space where many other people can come into Ghana and do business. Well, just so we don't belabor the point, the essence here is that globalization is taken across Africa, and every government that comes in an African country needs to create a leverage ground for many other persons to be able to benefit from the spoils of their governments. And I think this is the time for Mahama to see how he can give an opportunity in exchange for the services that Ghana does not have with other African countries who are doing better. So I think basically I just want to add emphasis on what Dr. Mengod said.
Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, gradually, slowly but surely, we are coming to the end of today's edition of the program. And of course, we are still digging a bit to comprehend the stakes around today's topic of discussion. Now, Dr. Fongod, adding up to what your co-panelist said, of course, he mentioned a couple of points, which he said in a bit not to repeat what he had mentioned earlier. But we mentioned there are strategies that need to be put in place by the new administration for them to be able to adopt new moves to strengthen Ghana's trade partnerships and attract foreign investment. We started that in the course of the conversation, but looking at Ghana's prosperity, the country has numerous challenges, and of course we mentioned that things are changing. The world is moving from unipolar to multipolar world. Amidst all this, how can the country, as John Mahama stated that they were going to, cut down on borrowing, and reduce some of the mistakes that were made in the previous administration? How, looking at this moving forward, can the incoming administration, how can they attract foreign investments and to some extent, boost trade partnerships they have with further partners or external partners in the bid to boost sustainable development and growth in the West African nation?
They have to listen to the market. They have to absolutely listen to the market. I was following at the campaign of John Mahama, and he said something that was incredible. He said he was hoping that, or he was, part of his campaign speech was this whole entire 24-hour economy. I don't even know what that means. Like, I'm trying to be able to have a 24-hour economy. It works in 3 shifts, just like we have here in the US, but that makes no sense. A 24-hour economy simply means you have grown the economy to a place where the market basically demands certain goods and services, and then obviously those goods and services has to be available, within the 24-hour period. For example, a hotel that is by an airport would be a 24-hour service, for example, because planes comes in at very odd hours. And you look at something like a hospital, that's a 24-hour service. If you look at some company that's involved in manufacturing, maybe they're producing bread or something or whatever stuff it is, that might be a 24-hour service because the market demands that for it to be 24 hours. If you have a lady who is basically selling tomatoes or basically doing some kind of a BAM selling like you have in Cameroon, what the hell is that person involved in? Why a 24-hour service? What would be the benefit of a 24-hour service of somebody who owns a provision store? You just want somebody to assist overnight. We have these terminologies and we show up with, to talk to people as if to say they're completely demented, they're delusional, they have no idea what you're talking about because we use these blanketed terms like a 24-hour economy to think that somehow things will work. No, the market decides how things has to be run. And I think that we have to basically go back to the market. We must be able to look at the market and understand what are the trends. What is the market looking for? What is the market asking for? If we know precisely what the market is asking for, then we make investments in that particular direction so that we can overall build up that particular economy. We also have to look at the market from a West African perspective and see how we can be able to fill the gaps where there are lapses in the West African region. For example, look at something like technology. Internet distribution across the region. We have very low penetration of internet distribution across the region, and if we are going to be able to have somebody who can come in and fill in that sector, then the outlook for the whole entire region and the amount of money to be made, will absolutely be great. So why don't a country like Ghana basically set up a robust data center that will be able to service the region, not just the country? That in itself would be the kind of development that the country needs, but the region also needs. In that way, the region will benefit from it, and then those investments in that particular sector will hold sway. So the idea of us just basically coming around says we need to build up an economy and then we need to basically invest in infrastructure. What infrastructure are we investing in? Why are we investing in those infrastructures? It's important for us to understand why and what, because if those questions are not being answered, we'll be building some magnificent structure like the Constable dams, where that basically take into consideration rainfall, climate change, and then in the end, something that was done in 1960 stands as a monument and is producing just a fraction of what it was intended to produce. So we have to be able to, the maintenance cost alone on that dam, outweighs all the benefits that the dam is producing. And so we have to be able to make sure that we fully understand what we're investing in and why we should be able to do those investments in the first place, and what would be the cost-benefit analysis when the investments are done.
I would like to stay with you, Dr. FONGOD. Now, you said there's some parameters that need to be taken into consideration. But now moving or shifting from Ghana to the rest of the African continent, there's been this, this shift in mindset, this paradigm shift across the African continent in a way that leaders can enhance growth and development in their respective countries. Now, looking at that, what should be the drivers of national prosperity for the growth and, of course, sustainable development of every nation across the African continent? So the African continent could stand at some point, because we are seeing at this particular point in time the vision of Pan-Africanism that is gaining momentum across Africa. So with these, from a Pan-African point or standpoint, what would you say could be some of the drivers of national prosperity?
I think that the only driver we should be employing at this particular point in time will be to listen to the private sector. Small to medium-sized enterprises have this uncanny ability to be able to develop a particular region because they are those who are closest to the market. These are the people who live and die in the market, and so they listen to the market. They know precisely what the market wants, and that's what they do. We have to be able to make sure that we listen to them intensely. The idea that we can just talk about policies. Policies means nothing, especially if the policies are not within the framework of a particular market. What are the niche market that we have on the continent of Africa or per country? What is it that we are known for? What is it that we have the skill sets for? What is it that the rest of the country, the continent needs? What is it that our region demands? Those are the ways in which we can basically escape this whole entire trap of poverty. We cannot be producing what people will not buy. We cannot be investing in things that has no return. We have to be able to listen to the market, the market, the market, the market, nothing else but the market. Let the market speak. Once the market speaks, I guarantee you that whatever investments you do in that particular direction will basically yield its fruit. Secondly, the government should not be invested in anything as if to say they're trying to make money, because they absolutely do not have the skill sets nor the capacity to do so. The government is run as an NGO, is run as a church, is run as a mosque. Unfortunately, the mosque, the church, they spend because they don't work for the money they receive. All they receive is pure donation. So the government receives our taxes by force, and then they convert the taxes, and then in this case, they just basically borrow money from countries, because obviously we don't have enough taxes to be able to do what we need to do so far as our countries are concerned, and so they just borrow. So we have to find ways in which we turn to the private sector and say, please help us out. Tell us exactly how things need to be done. Talk to us a little bit about what is it that you need. Tell us exactly about the difficulties in terms of the frameworks, okay, the structural frameworks that we have that is obstructing you from being able to achieve your goals. Talk to us about custom duties. Talk to us about taxation. Talk to us about how you can be able to bring up incentives, bring us tech experts from different countries, bring engineering from different countries. Maybe in terms of agriculture, you can bring from Israel or from Brazil. How can you be able to bring these different countries into our countries and help the local farmer and help those who are trying to build up, the agricultural sector actually expand? Those are ways in which the government can be able to help us basically become who we're supposed to be across the board. But the idea that the government thinks that they can and this is the whole entire issue about one political party, that political party just gets up and says, oh, we did this. No, that's not the idea. The idea is, what are the people doing? Let the market speak. The private sector is the key, and the small to medium-sized enterprises, once they grow, they flourish, and they have the capital funding that they need, for sustainable economic growth, then the region will have sustainable economic growth.
Indeed, and that is going to lead to regional integration and consequently a better seal the development of the African continent. Now, to wrap up with you, Chief MUSI, now you listen to your co-panelists picking up from where he stopped with the topic of discussion this day, where we focused on Ghana and, of course, what it means for this win or victory of the former Ghanaian President John Dramani Mahama. What would you say should be the take-home message amidst the challenges that lie ahead with the incoming administration? What should be the way forward for this new administration that is coming into power amidst the numerous challenges that lie ahead for the West African nation?
Well, Sharon, we have actually dwelled a lot with the internal policies of the new government of Mahama. And I think it is high time for him to learn from the lessons which we have already made on this program today. And his government also put in place the rightful government in place, and of course extend trade with Africa. And this cannot happen without other African countries also opening up their governments, opening up their nations for Ghana to do business with them. So if we have to do this, we need to be able to pick out a few lessons from the actions that took place in Ghana during these elections, so much so that other African countries can practice this, so that in return to collaborating with Ghana, they must be on an African understanding. Because my feeling is that Ghana might have been very democratic, and the former government might have collaborated with some African countries in the projects that they already carried on. And with the coming of Mahama, if he doesn't align with some of the African policies and the system across Africa, there is a possibility that he might face or meet challenges on his way trying to collaborate with other African nations. Because why not? the former government might have had ties with other African countries, which it might be difficult for him breaking these ties. And by the time we notice it, he's already running out of office. So yes, he needs to collaborate. African countries also need to pick out the good things that happen within this electoral process in Ghana, so that they can also implement them in their own countries for upcoming elections within the next 4 years. If elections also have to hold in other African countries, governments also need to be able to pick out a few lessons from this, from what happened in Ghana, and be able to apply or implement them during their own electoral processes. And of course, I will not end this program without emphasizing the fact that politicians in Africa at least need to be able to leave the scene. They need to be able to leave the scene once their mandate ends. You know, they need to be able to concede, because I saw the former president conceded the election and accepted the win. If we do this across Africa, we are making Africa gradually becoming a global village where we can speak as Africans. So I think it's important that on a show like this, we need to emphasize on this. And of course, I realized also that there was the issue of independent candidacy. It's important that within African countries, when we are planning to go for elections, we must look at having independent candidates put in their candidacies for election. And of course, the Electoral Commission needs to be completely independent, void of government influence. If this happens, the right of the people of Africa will always be felt. Because let me be serious here. Why Ghana has to succeed? Why Mahama has to succeed? One is because his home policies will be favorable for him, because the people who voted him felt their votes were considered and the rightful person is on seat. But if you go to another country and the people vote and the person who is on seat is not the rightful people whom they gave their votes to, they are also going to have instability within that country until that mandate comes to an end. I'm talking about cases of countries like Nigeria, which up till today we are still seeing Tinubu being pulled left and right and all of that. So it is important for us to give an independent electoral structure who proclaims elections, who monitors and provides elections to the interests of the people of that nation. And lastly, I think it is important for the voting right of people of a nation to be extended. I'm looking at, we extend voting rights to people even in the prisons, because in some countries we have almost 2 million people, 3 million people in prisons, and these people are not given the right to vote. I think we need to start hearing the rights or the voices of the people who are in prison to be able to determine who leads their country, because irrespective of the fact that they are in prison, they are going through corrections. And once they leave prison, they need to also feel as citizens and be part of the decision-making process of their nation. Lastly, is the fact that if we have to run for office, elected officers, the electoral process, the requirements to go into office for the high post of the president should not be too cumbersome in terms of cost. Because once you put people into power and give a status quo that if you don't pay this amount of money, if you don't meet a certain criteria, you will not be able to run for that post. It limits efficiency. It limits the rightful people getting into power, because only those who have the financial independency will be able to go into power. And what is practiced in Africa is that once these people spend their monies and get into power, they spend the next 4 years or they spend their entire mandate trying to get back the money they spent to get into power. So we need to look for a way to limit the bottlenecks, the constraints, the requirements of getting into high office. I'm saying all this because we have talked a lot about what Mahama stands to do for the Ghanaian nation, but it is important for us to take lessons out of this so that as Africans, we should be looking at making Africa a one and united continent. Thank you very much, and it's been a wonderful opportunity, at least sharing all of this and hoping that Mahama takes office and puts in place a wonderful team to lead. And I did emphasize some major government ministries, some major government structures, which he needs to get experts to run these structures than just get brothers, sisters, or friends.
Indeed, and that will make the African continent a great continent. Thank you immensely, Your Royal Majesty, Chief MUSI, for your contribution on today's edition of the program in your capacity as a Pan-Africanist. I'll equally say thank you to you, Dr. Stanley FONGOD, in your capacity as a Pan-Africanist and an economist, for your input on today's edition of the program. Meanwhile, wouldn't go without acknowledging the brilliant contribution of Dr. Nyakala Goke, who participated on the program in his capacity as, of course, the founding member of the Convention for Pan-Africanism and or Pan-Africanism for the African continent. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, we enumerated a couple of ideas in the course of today's program, where we cited what the incoming administration that has just won the elections in Ghana would need to take into consideration to be able to scrap off some of the challenges the country is facing. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you learned a lot from today's conversation. Meanwhile, it's on this note that we shall be drawing down the curtains of today's edition of Talking Point. Do stay in company of our numerous programs only over your Pan-African channel.
All right, sir. God bless.